This past week, Hurricane Helene had significant impacts to much of the southeastern U.S., bringing flooding rain, damage to the coastline, and plenty of wind damage inland as well. I hope the best for everyone who's been impacted by that storm, and certainly I'm sure everyone is thinking about you. We are continuing to track the tropics, though, as this week our weather stays active, so we want to keep you ahead of any upcoming storms. And we're also keeping an eye on the west, where high heat is expected this week too. Those two spots have the highest chance to see impactful weather, and that's what we're breaking down in this video up ahead. We're going to start with a look at the Atlantic and Gulf from the National Hurricane Center, and although Helene has taken the headline, it's been a very active Atlantic, and it continues to be here. We actually have a Hurricane Isaac, which is pretty far out in the middle of the Atlantic. We also have Tropical Storm Joyce out there as well, and we have three areas of potential development. One out here, which is, again, pretty far out into the Atlantic. Another that just came off the African coastline. And then the one that is more interesting that we will need to watch closer is this disturbance out here. And you may notice it is developing in the exact same region where Helene developed about a week prior, and it is expected to meander in the direction of the Gulf. So this one, though you don't want to hear it, has the potential to impact many of these same areas that were just impacted by Helene. That said, there's a lot of uncertainty with this system. Again, the National Hurricane Center is only giving it a 50% chance of development, but in case it does, we're going to take a look at where you need to be ready. What we're going to take a look at is where each of these systems may go, how they may develop. We're looking at one of our ensembles, and what you're going to see is a range of outcomes for each of these. And I want to focus on the Atlantic real quick, just so you know, maybe rest assured, these systems that we're tracking out there are unlikely to be very impactful. And anywhere you're seeing these deeper purple bullseyes, those are where you have stronger systems out there. But notice that as we move this forward throughout the week, most of the stuff in the Atlantic is going to stay out there. I mean, even this system out here, that's that area that's very likely to develop as we get into the start of the week. That's likely to stay out in the Atlantic, and we're being protected a lot by this ridge out here, keeping anything from getting into the U.S. So those Atlantic storms, unlikely to get near us. But it is that storm in the Gulf that we need to keep an eye on, and we're going to take a closer look at that right now because that is, like I said, the area of greatest concern. So I'm going to move you a little closer to it. Here's our system out here. Roughly speaking, that's where we're beginning to watch this thing try to develop. And as we move into the start of the week, you're going to see this begin to become more defined. This is now Monday, but we're going to keep pushing it into Tuesday here, Wednesday, Thursday. Now, the one thing that stands out is that you're seeing a very wide range of possibilities here. Each one of those numbers is one possibility for where this storm system may end up and where it may go. Now, that's good because it sort of tells you there's less confidence in development, less organization, and all around, it's a better signal to see. That's part of the reason the National Hurricane Center only has a 50% chance for development right now. But as we move later into the week, we're looking at Friday now and Saturday, you are seeing more or less each of these members work their way into the Gulf, which suggests that even if this storm system doesn't develop into something strong, it is likely to at least reach the Gulf, and there will likely be some impacts on the Gulf Coast somewhere. Now, again, we're looking at Saturday here. Now we're going to move it into Sunday. And even we'll take a look at Monday next week. You're beginning to see it deepen a bit. So you're seeing a more defined storm system here by the time we get to the start of Monday. And that would be Monday the 7th of October. So we're a ways out here. But the concern is that it has the potential to develop in the coast perhaps after this week and into the start of next week. Eventually, and we'll take a closer look at that actually as it gets to the Gulf Coast. Here's that Monday. Eventually, it would have the potential to make landfall if it becomes a storm, again, somewhere in the Gulf Coast. And while a lot of our guidance is suggesting about the same area Helene did, there's a ton of uncertainty with this. But I do want to mention that is something that we'll need to watch, especially as we get into the upcoming weekend and into the first full week of October. I'm thinking October 7th or 8th. That's where there would be the potential for perhaps some impacts. But like I said, it's not time to panic or worry about this yet. It's just something to watch and keep an eye on, and certainly we'll be doing that very closely. Here's a look at your temperature anomalies this week, and anywhere you're seeing the orange colors, even those sort of dark red colors, that's where you have well above average temperatures. And as we put this in motion, you're going to see, especially in the southwest, persistent above average heat. And you're even catching a bit of that through the plains and upper Midwest as we begin the week here on Monday. That's as a warm front's coming through, and you're going to see that wave in the northern U.S. shift farther eastwards through the week. But if you keep an eye on the southwest, that's where you're going to see, again, the more persistent higher heat. We're talking about temperatures that are going to be running 15 to 20 degrees above average. And that's a big deal because those temperatures would be about 90 to 100 degrees, if not above 100 degrees, in portions of the desert southwest. So high heat, triple digits likely across those portions of the country. But here we are Wednesday. Notice how persistent it stays. And you'll also notice a few waves breaking off and crossing the plains through the week too. So if you're in the plains, you can expect at least some 80s mixed in there, maybe 90s too if you're in portions of Texas. But we're moving us into Thursday. Once again, that high heat sticking around. Florida's valley out there certainly has a chance to break 100 on a couple of these days. And now on to Friday, still seeing that heat persist out there in the southwest, much of the west too, obviously up the Florida coast, or California coastline as well. And into the weekend, this really isn't going to break down. This pattern remains pretty persistent. Waves of it breaking in across the plains too. Anytime you get a warm front, it's going to lift some of that heat farther north. And as we head through the weekend, it remains hot in the west with waves of warmth moving through the plains throughout this period too. Otherwise, the East Coast remains much closer to average, and so do other portions of the area. Now, one of the other things I'm going to take a look at here is our heat risk map with you guys. And on our heat risk map, we can see here for Monday, anything shaded in the red and purples where you have some of the higher heat risks, a little bit in southern Florida there too. But Tuesday, you're seeing that heat spread out more in the southwest. There's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it begins to abate a bit, and into the weekend, it still stays hot, especially in those desert areas, but especially towards the beginning of the week here, Tuesday and Wednesday, that's where we have some of the highest concern, and particularly in those valleys that heat up more. But of course, heat not just one of the only areas, not one of the things we need to watch. I have a quick overview of the rest of the U.S. and the type of weather you can expect this week, as well as we are getting into another active pattern. Here's a look at our more active pattern, and we're going to use the upper air to tell us where some of those storm systems will be. First thing you're noticing, that's actually the remnant of Helene right now there, that kind of bubble. We also have this trough cutting in from the north, and anytime you see a trough, that usually indicates more gray, rainy weather. Now, as we move this forward, you're going to see that first trough aloft, that kind of cuts the U.S., Helene sort of dissipates, and then as we get later into the week here, we're going to see another trough begin to emerge, sort of a more subtle trough, try to develop in the north central U.S., and late in the period here, as we head into next weekend, you're going to see this other trough begin to dig into the Pacific Northwest, and that may have some impacts across the northern plains region as we get into the middle and later days of this upcoming week. So a little bit of up and down weather pattern, and certainly a couple storm systems that'll push through. But the one thing that does stand out to me is that looking at these, they're all more subtle, and that suggests nothing significantly impactful, but a couple that we're going to take a closer look at right here. And with that, here's a look at what may be going on near the surface. And what you're seeing is, first off, the remnant of Helene. Again, it's all the rain you're seeing right around here. But we also have a couple other systems. Like I said, we have this one that's going to be cutting through the northern U.S. and moving east this week. And we're also going to keep an eye on that system closer to the Pacific Northwest. So as I put this into motion, you're going to see the remnant of Helene work its way out eventually through the mid-Atlantic states out there. Could bring some decent rainfall before it's gone. We have a front developing on that system in the north central U.S. That's going to impact portions of the Great Lakes states and the Northeast as we get into the middle of this upcoming week. And then we're kind of quiet as a whole. One of the other areas actually worth watching and monitoring, and it's not for that tropical system we were talking about earlier, but it is the Gulf down here, as there is going to be some persistent weakness in the ridge, which would otherwise keep it dry. And with that, I do expect there to be some precipitation out there this week. But in the Pacific Northwest, here we are on Friday. You can see that storm system arriving out there, and that may bring some different impacts to the northern central U.S. as we get into the upcoming weekend. But as you can see here, there really isn't anything substantial in the way, just a couple different chances for rain, mainly in the northern U.S. and mainly in the Gulf. Now, we can also take a look at the total precipitation just to get an idea of how much rain may fall from these upcoming systems, and I'll do that right here for you. We're starting here on Monday. We're just adding it up through the week, more or less. The one thing that stands out is that the remnant of Helene may still pack a punch for portions of the mid-Atlantic. Not something that you want to hear, but Monday, Tuesday, there is the potential to see as much as 2 to 4 more inches of rain in many of those spots. Could even be a little bit more beyond that. So just be prepared for potential flooding out there. Then we get into the Northeast. There's that system. It kind of dries out as it gets in there. So really not a huge deal. And then even as we look towards the Gulf, a lot of that weakness in the ridge, it stays over the water. So you're seeing on the coastline perhaps an inch, maybe up to 2 in spots, but nothing major. Then towards the Pacific Northwest, look at that system largely staying out in Canada, being eaten up by the mountains. Nothing hugely impactful. Again, is the take home here. Very dry across the western U.S. Basically, if you are west of the Mississippi, almost very conveniently carved out like that, it's going to be a very dry and generally very sunny week. For the eastern U.S., even so, while there is going to be rain, nothing's really that substantial. So when looking at this forecast, the biggest players, like I said, are the heat out here and the potential development in the Gulf as we get into the later days of the week. But we'll certainly keep a close eye on those. And before we wrap this up, we're going to take a look at our fall foliage, especially now that we're looking at some decent weather in some spots and many areas beginning to peak this week too. So here's an update on that fall foliage across the country, and a couple things stand out. Well, first off, you can tell where the mountains are. That's where the foliage is reaching its peak right now, especially in the western U.S. We actually have seen it pass its peak in many of the highest terrain areas in the west. Across New England, though, looking like a great season for fall foliage out there, and you're beginning to see it peak in some of the mountains out there, including the Adirondacks in upstate New York as well. So good news for fall foliage lovers, leaf peepers, if you call yourself that. And as we go through this week, I'm just going to move it forward into the end of the week here. You're looking at peak color really taking over across much more of the U.S. and more than just some of the highest terrain. Of course, we're passing our peak in the highest peaks of the Rockies, but some of those more mid-level mountains beginning to see their peaks met. Across New England, that peak is coming right on time, if not a little bit early. A lot of color expected in the mountains, a little bit lower than the peaks as we get later into this week. And even across the north central U.S., some of our cooler, drier climates, we are beginning to see the peak color show up. So it's happening quickly this week. In the week following, I'll give you a sneak peek at here, that's when I believe we see really some of the most rapid color changes. And by the time we get to the middle of October, I mean, look at this. Basically, if you're in any mountainous area, you're seeing peak color, if not past peak. Our north central U.S. really showing a lot of color out here, and even the northeast, still in the hills, but not even just the mountains, we're seeing those colors really come out. So it's an exciting 1 to 3 weeks ahead for fall foliage, and something we're going to keep you updated on. But remember, get those pictures quick because it doesn't last long. And as long as we don't get any big storm systems, we'll hang on to it just a little bit longer, but that's no guarantee in October, so enjoy it. So with that, we're wrapping up our forecast for the week ahead here. Hopefully we were able to keep you prepared ahead of Helene. We were talking about that storm before it even developed, and certainly we didn't want it to come to fruition, though it did. And similarly with this storm that may be developing this week, it looks like it's going to be more so into the beginning of next, but we're going to keep a close eye on it. We're going to hope for the best, no development, but it could, so we're going to watch it closely. And in the west, of course, high heat. Make sure you're prepared for that. Even though we're getting into October, it can still happen, especially among the dry air. We're hoping that wildfires aren't too much of a concern out there, but it is at least something worth noting. And moving forward to the rest of the fall, we're keeping an eye on that fall foliage. And of course, our weather becomes more active typically as we get towards the end of fall. And any systems that may develop, we're going to keep you ahead of. So consider following along, and we're going to have more updates for you every Sunday looking at the week ahead. So stay safe. Enjoy your week. I wish for speedy recoveries to all those impacted by Helene, and we'll see you next Sunday.